April 1964. The United States mourned the passing of one of its most iconic military leaders. General Douglas MacArthur, a man whose life was intertwined with the destiny of the 20th century, died in Walter Reed Army Medical Center at the age of 84. His death marked not only the end of a remarkable career, but also the fading of an era in which military heroes commanded immense public attention. The news of his passing reverberated far beyond Washington, stirring emotions across the world. Who was this man whose death was called tragic? Not because of violence or sudden loss, but because it symbolized the departure of a towering figure whose story was inseparable from the nation's triumphs and challenges. If you are fascinated by the great figures of history and their lasting impact, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Many more captivating stories from the past are on the way. Douglas MacArthur was born on January 26, 1880, in Little Rock, Arkansas, into a family deeply rooted in military tradition. His father, Arthur MacArthur Jr., had been a decorated officer in the Union Army during the Civil War and later served in the Philippines as a general. The young Douglas grew up surrounded by the discipline, stories, and expectations of military service. His mother, Mary Pinckney Hardy MacArthur, was equally influential, instilling in her son an unshakable belief in his destiny. MacArthur entered the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1899, excelling both academically and militarily. He graduated at the top of his class in 1903, setting the stage for a career that would span half a century. His early assignments took him across the globe, from postings in Asia to service during the Mexican expedition in 1914. During the First World War, MacArthur emerged as one of America's most promising young officers. Serving with the famed Rainbow Division, he distinguished himself for his courage and leadership in France. By the end of the war, he had risen to brigadier general, decorated for his bravery and tactical skill. These formative experiences created the foundation for his reputation: bold, charismatic, and unafraid of risk. As the 1920s and 1930s unfolded, MacArthur's career expanded beyond the battlefield. He became superintendent of West Point, where he modernized the academy, emphasizing athletics and rigorous academics. Later, he served as Chief of Staff of the Army, shaping doctrine and preparing the nation for the challenges ahead. By the eve of the Second World War, MacArthur was already a household name, a soldier whose career embodied both tradition and innovation. The outbreak of World War II placed MacArthur at the center of the Pacific struggle. In 1941, he was commander of U.S. forces in the Philippines when Japan launched its sudden attacks across Asia and the Pacific. Despite valiant efforts, American and Filipino troops were overwhelmed, and MacArthur was ordered to withdraw to Australia. It was then that he delivered his famous promise, "I shall return." This declaration became both a rallying cry and a personal mission. Over the next 3 years, MacArthur orchestrated one of the most remarkable military campaigns of the war. Using a strategy of island hopping, he bypassed heavily fortified Japanese positions, advancing steadily toward the Philippines. His dramatic return in October 1944 fulfilled his promise as he waded ashore at Leyte Gulf, declaring the liberation of the islands. By 1945, MacArthur stood at the peak of his fame. His leadership in the Pacific was central to the Allied victory. When Japan surrendered in August, It was MacArthur who accepted the formal capitulation aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. The image of the tall, pipe-smoking general presiding over the ceremony became one of the defining moments of the 20th century. Yet victory did not mark the end of his influence. Instead, it opened a new chapter in which MacArthur would shape not only the outcome of the war, but also the peace that followed. His role in Japan after 1945 would define his legacy as much as his wartime triumphs. From 1945 to 1951, Douglas MacArthur served as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers in Japan. His task was daunting: to oversee the occupation, rebuild a devastated nation, and ensure that Japan would never again pose a threat to world peace. MacArthur approached this role with both authority and vision. Under his guidance, sweeping reforms reshaped Japan's political, social, and economic landscape. A new constitution, drafted under his supervision, established democratic institutions, guaranteed civil liberties, and redefined the emperor's role. Land reforms redistributed property, while economic policies laid the foundation for future prosperity. Equally significant were MacArthur's efforts to demilitarize Japan and to encourage modernization. Schools, universities, and industries were restructured, and women gained new rights in society. The general, often seen as aloof and distant, nonetheless commanded respect in Japan, where many admired his fairness and commitment to rebuilding. By the late 1940s, Japan had begun its transformation into a stable democracy and would soon become an economic powerhouse. For MacArthur, this period reinforced his image not merely as a warrior, but as a statesman. However, global tensions soon shifted. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 thrust him back into direct command of military operations, this time on the Asian mainland. When North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in June 1950, MacArthur was placed in command of United Nations forces. At first, the situation was desperate. South Korea nearly collapsed, but MacArthur's bold amphibious landing at Incheon in September turned the tide. The operation, considered one of the most brilliant maneuvers in military history, restored momentum to the UN coalition. Pushing north, MacArthur sought complete victory, yet his ambitions soon collided with political realities. As Chinese forces entered the war in late 1950, the conflict escalated. MacArthur called for expanded operations, even suggesting the use of measures that alarmed both allies and policymakers in Washington. President Harry Truman, determined to avoid a wider war, increasingly clashed with his general. The tension reached its breaking point in April 1951, when Truman relieved MacArthur of his command. The dismissal shocked the nation. MacArthur returned home to a hero's welcome, delivering a famous farewell address to Congress in which he declared, "Old soldiers never die. They just fade away." Though his removal ended his active military career, MacArthur remained a figure of immense public interest. For many Americans, he embodied both the triumphs and controversies of the mid-20th century. After his dismissal, MacArthur lived largely outside of public office, though he remained an advisor and commentator on military affairs. In 1952, some urged him to seek the presidency, but his political ambitions never materialized. Instead, he accepted roles in the private sector, serving on corporate boards while maintaining his reputation as a revered statesman. By the early 1960s, age and illness began to catch up with him. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy invited MacArthur to the White House, seeking his counsel on Cold War strategy. The meeting symbolized reconciliation between the soldier and the nation's leadership. In March 1964, MacArthur was admitted to Walter Reed Army Medical Center for gallbladder and liver ailments. Despite treatment, his condition worsened. On April 5, 1964, General Douglas MacArthur passed away at the age of 84. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered a state funeral, honoring him as one of America's greatest military leaders. His body lay in state at the Capitol, where thousands came to pay their respects. Finally, he was buried at the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, Virginia. His death was called tragic, not because it was sudden or violent, but because it marked the end of a generation. With him faded the era of the great commanders of the Second World War, figures who had loomed larger than life, and whose passing symbolized the close of a chapter in history. The death of Douglas MacArthur was more than the loss of a soldier. It was the symbolic conclusion of an era in which military leaders shaped not only wars, but the very destinies of nations. His career bridged the American Civil War tradition of his father, the battlefields of World War I, the triumphs of World War II, and the struggles of Korea. In his life and death, MacArthur embodied the tensions between ambition and duty, vision and reality. His passing invites us to ask, how do societies remember their heroes? And what lessons endure when the last echoes of their footsteps have faded away? If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss new journeys into the past.